First things first, you're going to want to sterilize your equipment. I just put it in a little bit of water in a pot and boil it and steam it, but you could also do this in your dishwasher. You're going to add your milk to your pot. Now, a little bit of info on milk. I live in Canada, so we don't have like ultra pasteurized milk here that I know of. But if you do have ultra pasteurized milk where you are, don't use that. You want to use, well, if you can get raw milk, that's like totally number one, top of the list. I would recommend using raw milk, but just make sure you're not getting ultra pasteurized. This is a whole 3% fat milk that I'm using here. It's also organic. I don't know that that really makes much of a difference if you can't get organic, but make sure that it's whole milk, not ultra unpasteurized. That won't work for this. These are our ingredients. I'll give you a full list of the ingredients in the description as well. We're using rennet, which is our coagulating agent, and calcium chloride, which is already in milk, but it gets taken out when it's pasteurized. So if you have raw milk, don't add calcium chloride. And there was a culture there as well. We're going to heat our milk to 86 degrees. And then what you want to do is you want to take your calcium chloride first. That's what we're going to add into our milk first, is the calcium chloride. And like I said, calcium chloride is something that naturally occurs in milk, but when it's pasteurized, it gets cooked off, I guess. It's not present anymore. So you need to add it back into the milk, or it's not going to thicken up. It's not going to separate. It's not going to do what it's supposed to do. If you have raw milk, don't add the calcium chloride. You don't need it. So we're just going to add this in to our 86-degree milk, and we're going to mix it in. You want to mix it fairly thoroughly, but I don't mix the milk vigorously. I kind of like pull the milk up from the bottom and push it down, pull it up and down. And at this point, we're also going to add in our culture. This is a mesophilic culture, mesophilic 100. You can also use a culture that's actually called Feta culture. I'll leave in the description where you can get these things as well. Sprinkle that on top and let it sit just for a couple of minutes to rehydrate, and then we're going to mix it in to our milk. Make sure that you're mixing it in fairly thoroughly. You want all the milk from the bottom to come to the top. That's what I'm doing here. I'm mixing it all from the bottom up to the top. We are going to cover this and we're going to let this incubate for 1 hour. Once our hour's up, now we can add in our rennet, which is going to solidify our milk so that we can start separating the curds and the whey. You can see here that I'm mixing it in water. That's so that it's easier for it to mix into the milk, because especially with the rennet, when you get it in there, you want to mix it fairly quickly because you don't want the milk to start to solidify while you're mixing it in. So you want to pour it in, and then as I showed you before, you're going to like push the milk down from the top and pull it up, down and up. I'm not like mixing it like you would like around in a circle. I'm pushing the milk up and down, and you don't want to mix this for more than 1 minute. So get it well incorporated. Make sure that you're lifting the milk up from the bottom. You want all of the milk to have some rennet touching it so that it will all thicken properly. I then use my spoon to stop the milk from moving. That's what I'm holding it up and down and just kind of holding it sort of in place. That stops the milk from moving around all over the place. And once we've got our milk slowed down and not moving anymore, we're going to cover it and we're going to let this incubate for 1 hour. And after an hour, you want to check for a clean break is what they call it. So I'm sticking my finger in here. I pull up. And you might notice that I don't have a clean break. This is kind of sloppy. So I'm going to leave this for another half an hour to sit so that we can get a clean break. So this is half an hour later, and you can see how when I pull it up, it breaks apart nicely. So it's ready to cut. The knife I'm using here to cut this is actually like a knife for cutting cakes in half, but it works really well for this as well. You can just use any long knife, any knife that's long enough to get down to the bottom of whatever pot it is that you're using. I am cutting these into, the goal is to kind of try and get the cheese curds to be about 1 inch. And we're cutting it because that's going to encourage the whey to weep out of the milk solids, which are the curds. Once you get all your vertical cuts, you want to do some horizontal cuts. That can be a little difficult. Some people use like a whisk for this, but I just put my knife kind of like on its side and draw it through the milk. It doesn't really matter because we're going to stir it and we can cut up any big chunks later on. Just cut it as best you can. So now you want to check and make sure that your milk is still at 86 degrees. My milk wasn't, so I did turn my stove back on right down on low, because you don't want this to like heat up too much. I only had to come up about 3 degrees. So we're going to let this sit for 5 minutes. We're not stirring it. We're letting it sit for 5 minutes, and I'm bringing my temperature up. And what we're doing here is we're letting the curds heal. That's what they call this process. And every time you do this, so as I said, we haven't stirred this at all yet. We're going to do our first stir on this. And every time you do this, you'll notice that more and more of the whey has weeped out of the curds. So what I'm doing here is I'm lifting up my curds. They're really, really delicate right now, especially because this isn't raw milk. If this is raw milk, I find that the curds aren't as delicate at this point. They're really delicate right now. So I'm just lifting them up and chopping them into smaller bits. We want it to be kind of uniform. Like I said, 1 inch pieces or so. If they're smaller, it doesn't matter, but don't stir this really vigorously because you don't want to damage your curds. So just go through and find any big pieces, give it a stir, and then I'm checking my temperature again just to make sure it's at 86 degrees. It is. I'm going to cover it and let it sit for another 5 minutes. Usually you would do this for 15 minutes, so 3 times. I actually ended up doing this for 20 minutes just because it didn't quite look right when I got done with my 15 minutes. So this is my 3rd time round, and I wanted that whey on top to be a little bit more clear, like it'll be milky. You want it to be kind of clear. So I did this one more time after this time that you're seeing me do it here. You kind of get used to what the curds and whey should look like when you want to start straining it out. So this is what I'm happy with. I like the way that this looks. Some of my curds are still big. If you find big curds, just kind of chop them up a little bit. The whey's going to come out of them. Don't worry about it. Oh, I did let it sit one more time after this. After I stirred it, I just let it sit for another 5 minutes, and then I separated or strained it out. So this is just a colander with a cheesecloth over top of it and a bowl underneath of it to catch the whey, because you're going to want to save your whey. There's so many things you can do with the whey. You don't want to throw that out. So I just scoop it. I could have dumped it, but it's really messy when I just pour it in. And these curds have healed quite well, so I could have dumped it. It wouldn't have damaged them. So now you're just going to drop all the sides of your cheesecloth, because we're going to hang this, and that's how we're going to encourage all the rest of the whey to come out of our cheese. So you want to gather up all your sides and make sure you get everything nice and even, because when it's hanging, it can slip out and make a mess, and you don't want that. So make sure you're gathering it all up really nicely together. And I'm just using some cotton twine to tie this up. So I tie it nice and tight there, and we're going to tie this into a bow, and we're going to hang it where the bow is, and make sure that at the end, so that the bow, the twine doesn't slip out, tie yourself a really good knot in there in both sides, so that when you pull it, it doesn't come apart. You'll see what I mean when you're doing it. And now you can see that I'm pulling it and they're not coming out the end, and then we'll hang it off of that. So this is the whey that has come off of it already before it's dripped. And I just put it in some mason jars and store it in the fridge so I can use it in my breads and smoothies and stuff like that. I have a special spot where I hang my cheese. You can hang this off of anything. A lot of people use the knob on their cupboard. Maybe you can get your husband to put a hook in the ceiling for you or something. And this is now 8 hours later. This has been dripping for 8 hours, and it should be nice and dry, and you can handle it at this point. So you're going to take it out of the bag, and we're going to salt it now. And we're going to salt it and encourage it to release even more of the whey. So you want to cut it into about 1.5-inch slices. It doesn't really matter. Thicker is better because you don't want it to fall apart. But you can see here that it's fairly well set up. It shouldn't be too delicate at this point. And all I do is put some salt on either side, and I'm putting it in that plastic container on the side there. Cover as much of it as you can. And you can stack this on top of each other. Don't worry about it. It won't hurt it if it's stacked on top of each other. That's how I always do it. And now you probably won't use all of the salt that you have in your bowl. It's 3 tablespoons of salt that I have there. We're going to do this twice though. So I get everything put into the container. I put the lid on it and I let it sit. And after a little while, liquid will come out of it. I'll dump that off and then I'll resalt it. I usually do it about twice. I'm leaving this on the counter at this point. And then once it's all done, then you can put it in the fridge. I find in the fridge overnight. And this here has been in the fridge overnight, and it is totally ready to eat. If you let it age for a little bit longer, it gets more of a feta flavor, but it's edible at this point.